Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to the Global Career Forum, the international online recruiting event organized for the MBA students from top business schools. We welcome you to today's online session with Alvarez and Marshall, and we have the pleasure to welcome for this live session our two keynote speakers, Mohammed Jafar, who's a senior associate at Alvarez and Marshall, and Karan Kochar, who's associate at Alvarez and Marshall. As this is a live session, I do invite all participants to ask your questions in the Q&A panel on the top right side, and we'll convey them to the speakers. Mohammed and Karan, warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Zaina. Thanks for having us.
So perhaps to kick off this session, give an introduction of yourself, your current role, and your background.
Sure. So Mohammed and I are here representing Alvarez and Marsal. Alvarez and Marsal is a global management consulting firm. We have presence in about 35 countries with over 50 offices. And in the region, we specialize mainly in strategy and performance improvement, restructuring, and forensic investigations. The firm started out in 1983 primarily as a restructuring firm. You may know A&M from its very public handling of the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy case. But since then, we've transitioned into working not just with unhealthy and insolvent companies, but also with healthier and more successful companies, especially in the region where we do a lot of strategy and transformation work. I'm an associate with the firm. I've been with the firm for 2 years now, mainly worked across the GCC in financial services, real estate, healthcare, e-commerce, and automotive. And MJ?
Actually, just to carry on from there, Khan actually joined as an intern and got the full-time analyst job and then quickly got promoted to an associate. So well done on that. And I'm a senior associate. I joined as an associate, and I've been with the firm almost 2 years and a half. Me and Khan joined around more or less the same time. And I came from a background of banking and engineering, nothing to do with consulting. Khan is a born and bred consultant. And that's basically how we get to where we are today.
Excellent, thank you. When we talk about the company, how do you see the company evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
So as Khan said, A&M started more with companies that are distressed, that are in need of restructuring. But as we moved on, we started handling companies on the other side of the life cycle, companies that are emerging, that want to expand. And so in line with that, the company is actually growing into new verticals. So in addition to solvency cases and litigation cases, we're moving more towards the strategy, more towards the performance improvement, and building better relationships with the client to help him through each of his individual issues, whether they be insolvency issues or growth and strategy.
Yep.
Thank you very much. And when you talk about the growth of the company, where do you place or where do you need to place the MBA profiles?
So we typically hire MBA profiles right out of B school or with 1 to 2 years experience after B school in our senior associate program. This is intended for people who have an overall 3 to 5 years business experience, preferred in consulting already, but we welcome industry practitioners as well. But that's a very critical position because the role you play as a senior associate is really to manage multiple work streams on any client engagement. You're expected to build client relationships in parallel with the managing directors and the senior directors, and you are eventually expected to make the transition to managerial roles to actually lead projects. So it's a very critical position and probably the most important in A&M and in consulting.
Excellent, thank you. When we talk about that, what do you look for in your MBA hires?
One skill that is very important nowadays is learnability. So we look at how fast candidates can learn and pick up new stuff, because consulting, most people who come consulting, and they don't have necessarily the background of consulting or know about the sector that we're working in. So we need someone who's sharp, who can get on the ground, get his hands dirty, and be very quick to get things going. In addition to this, we want someone who's very analytical, good with numbers, and who can actually not just analyze data, but present it in a nice and structured way.
And what would you say, if we talk about that, what are the skills that MBA students or MBA talent underestimate the most?
That's a very good question. I think, I mean, students like the ones in this session would likely be very well aware of management consulting as a whole. So I think the skills they would definitely be focusing on are, the analytical skills, the structured problem-solving ability, which are skills they can build both in their MBA and in their careers prior. But I think what most people maybe not necessarily underestimate but don't address as much is the relationship building element of consulting. Because especially when you come right after your MBA, like I said, you're expected to start building your own client relationships. And as you grow in the firm, these relationships will only be stronger. And you'll have an opportunity to leverage them in various business development scenarios. So I think it's very good to have the intrinsic skills and to have the analytical ability. But it's equally important to know yourself and to know how you can build sustainable relationships with current and future clients.
Thank you. So there are today new rules that we are also advertising through Global Career Forum. The first one is the manager position, and the second one is the senior associate. Could I ask you to spend just a few words on those two?
So, like Khan probably already mentioned a bit, senior associate is expected to lead a few work streams. So usually he works with the client on his individual work streams. He's supposed to take accountability of the work stream and actually lead it from beginning to end in terms of deliverables and client handling and in terms of the whole managing and accountability of the work stream. The manager is probably a level above and manages several work streams. So in a way, the way I see it, a senior associate does not necessarily have other consultants reporting to him, or he doesn't oversee other consultants. That is more a manager role. So manager role would probably not go into the details that a senior associate would go. The manager would oversee the project as a whole, taking accountability for all the work streams, and guiding and driving the senior associates, and analysts wherever possible. And at the end of the day, he would lead the relationship management with the client. I mean, he would be dealing with the C-suite executives and managing the client expectation. Not only that, but also managing the partner's expectations, because that's a huge part of consulting. You need to be able to manage your clients, but you also need to manage your partners as well.
I think just to add to what MJ said, in a role as a manager, you're effectively the go-to guy for all stakeholders involved. So it's probably the most stressful, but also the most fulfilling job, because you're at the culmination of your career in the development sense and the production sense and the analytical sense, and you're transitioning towards more of a leadership role, but you still have to balance both. So ideally, we look for manager candidates who have between 6 to 8 years of experience, obviously strong MBA credentials, but preferably those who have demonstrated that they can lead engagements in their careers after their MBA.
Maybe a question related to this. If you look at senior management at the firm, people who have progress, what is the type of a person that succeeds at Alvarez and Marsal?
You want to take that one?
Take it.
So I think if we look at our careers and the colleagues we've had over the past couple of years, I think the real key is just remembering the overall value proposition of management consulting, which is at the end of the day to add value to the client. And the people I've seen who have grown most rapidly and most sustainably are the people who manage to strike a balance between obviously the top priority, which is adding value to the client, but also building the firm. So not just their work on client engagements and in building client relationships, but also in finding new and innovative ways to really exemplify the firm's values, or potentially identifying new opportunities for the firm to work in, new sectors, new functions, new capabilities. So I think those who succeed keep the big picture in mind. They're not necessarily just focused on the day-to-day work, but they want to see themselves grow with the firm, and they want to build the firm as a whole, as opposed to themselves or their teams.
Excellent. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question coming in from Guillermo, who's asking, considering the changes that happen in the management consulting environment, would you consider that having programming skills would be a differential to be a successful candidate at A&M?
I would say yes, to be honest. It's maybe not a differential, but it's a good addition to have. It's a good advantage to have. As things progress, as management consultants, we have a lot of work with data, and we need to analyze a lot of data. And as things move on, the data becomes larger and larger, and it becomes harder and harder to analyze it. Not in terms of just visualizing the data, but also in terms of making sense of it or even processing the data. So as this happens, we are having to move to more advanced tools. I mean, I would imagine in older days an Excel would probably have been sufficient. Nowadays, you need more tools that need more processing and better visualizing. A lot of this would actually require programming and coding. So actually having that skills is a big advantage. And it will only become more of an advantage as time passes on.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Could you share also with us examples of projects that new hires would be working on?
Sure. So I can give you an example of probably one of the most notable projects that I've worked on recently. This is something I worked on last summer, in the summer of 2018, and it was in a GCC country, working for an asset management and investment banking company that had recently acquired a competitor, another asset management investment banking company. So what we did is typically called post-merger integration, or PMI, where you have a consulting firm that comes in and manages the entire merger, both from a strategic and operational perspective. And this was very, very challenging for me, but also very fulfilling, because you really have to align on a lot of key stakeholders. You're going to be working with legal teams, with regulators, with central banks, with capital markets authorities. So you have to, number one, have a fundamental understanding of your subject matter and really know the deep dives of both your client and the acquired target company. And at the same time, it really mixes a lot of the different skills and toolkits that you use in consulting, because you're doing a lot of commercial and financial due diligence, like you typically would for a private equity firm. But at the same time, you're also doing a lot of interim management, project management offices, which, by the way, is a growing part of the field. Consulting historically has been a lot more about ideas and about idea origination, but it's actively moving towards implementation and interim management. And A&M is taking the lead because this is something A&M has been doing a little bit longer than some other players in the market. So that was probably one of the most interesting experiences for me. MJ?
And one of the most interesting experiences for me is one that we worked together on. And our client was a large automotive dealer in GCC, and who wanted to increase their revenue. And so one of our recommendations was to improve their sales process. And the CEO actually came in and said, listen, if this is what you guys think, why don't you go on the ground and improve that? So me, Karn, and another colleague actually went to their biggest showroom in the UAE and took over the showroom for a month, and men being men, and we selected which cars we want to display, and we gamified the whole experience. So we told the sales agents the best agent at the end of the week takes the car home. We added financial, non-financial rewards, and we initiated leads. So it was very interesting in terms of accountability. So we were accountable for the whole showroom, and we actually stood and sold cars, something that we have never done before, but it was a very nice experience.
So this, what MJ has just mentioned, is a perfect example of how A&M likes to go above and beyond the typical consulting value proposition. As a firm, A&M doesn't believe in handing the client a document and then watching that document, catch dust in a drawer. So this is a great example of when A&M actually sent a team, like MJ just said, to actually join the client in their sales process and actually do the work with them and let them learn both directly and indirectly. So this is, again, probably for both of us, one of the coolest experiences.
Great, thank you. MJ, just a question for you before you were talking about programming skills. There's a follow-up question. that, what languages and tools for data processing and visualization you consider are the most useful?
And well, in terms of processing, I mean, in terms of programming, you can go into C# and C++, and you can always use these to process the data you want, but that's a bit too detailed, too analytical for what we do. And we're still a level above that. We're more into the visualization tools, and we talk about tools like Power BI, Tableau, which don't require a lot of coding, but are more to do with the visualizing the data. But again, as things move on, and I know that languages such as Java, C++, and C# will become more and more relevant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On
On
average,
average,
how long
how
do
long do
people
people
stay
stay in the same position? How
How
does A&M promote career evolution change?
So I would say for manager and below, it's typically 2 to 3 years in the same position. We typically hire analysts right out of undergrad, and then between 2 to 3 years, they aspire to make a promotion to associate, after which we strongly recommend some form of master's degree or an MBA. And once we have our senior associates come in, if they can prove themselves and if they can take leadership opportunities, I would say 2 to 3 years is probably a good estimate of making manager. Having said that, as you grow in consulting and take more leadership roles, it really depends on what you make of it. As you grow and take more business development roles, your client relationships will play a huge role in how quickly you rise up the ladder, as well as how your quality of your delivery as leading projects. So until manager, it's about a standard process if you perform, and beyond that, a lot of it is driven by just what you do in your position.
Great. So we talked about full-time opportunities. Do you also offer any internships? Would that serve as a pipeline for full-time roles?
Yes, indeed, and we do offer summer internships, not necessarily even summer. We offer internship programs based on our and the candidate's availability. So we try and understand what works best for the candidate, what works best for us, and we try to come to an agreement. Usually what happens is that internship, if successful, can lead to a full-time role. And we've seen that happen before. We've seen that happen before on an MBA level, where people have done an internship during their MBA and come and they're full-time senior associates now. And Khan, as an undergrad level, began as an intern and then came as an analyst once completed.
Perhaps a few words on which are the business schools that you target?
So it depends geographically. For Europe, for example, we have a solid chunk of alumni at A&M from INSEAD, also from HEC in Paris, as well as from IE Business School in Spain, London Business School in the UK. So we generally recruit from the top 5, top 10 schools across Europe, as well as in the States, really the same rankings. And also for people who have done their MBAs in places like India, for example, typically IIM and ISB, again, some of the higher ranked universities. For undergrad, we're a big recruiter from the American University of Beirut, which has produced some solid consulting candidates over the years. So that's generally what we look at.
And just to add to that, yes, the school of which you come from is an important factor, but it is not the only factor. So what usually happens is I can tell you, we get 20, 30 CVs from the same school, and we get 20, 30 CVs from schools we've not heard of. And so what usually happens is we're looking for something that stands out and something that goes over and beyond. Even if it's not necessarily one of the best schools, but the candidate has shown promise, has shown potential, we're more than happy to, we always actually consider the candidate.
So to build on that, what can job applicants do to stand out?
You want to take that one? Sure. So I think if you're coming from the MBA program, obviously the MBA is an intensive course, but what we really look for is to see how you made full use of that experience, whether you worked on a specific project in one of your classes, anything really, corporate finance or accounting, any of your classes where you managed to demonstrate some level of innovation, maybe a really cool co-op or internship program, or maybe a really cool tool that you developed, but just something that tells us that you're above and beyond the typical candidate. And I think we also really look for unconventional creativity. We've hired people who have previously run their own startups. I have a colleague who had started the first electronics e-commerce company in his country of origin, and then he went to INSEAD, and then he joined us. So that really stood out because it showed that people like that gentleman are risk takers. They are not afraid to really take the plunge and try something they're passionate about. And at the same time, they make sure that their analytical and consulting related skills are there where we look for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, a related question to the schools you've mentioned before. Obviously, these schools also have a high percentage of international students. For the two positions that you are recruiting for currently, would you sponsor for work permits, visas?
So definitely, that's something that's very common in the UAE. Actually, in the UAE, you cannot work in the UAE without a work visa. So that's something that's very normal. It's part of the regular process that anyone the firm selects, it will sponsor for a permanent visa, for work visa.
Excellent.
And they candidates doing jobs in a different region than their school, should they contact their target office directly or work with their local A&M recruiter?
I think if you're interested in working in the Middle East office, definitely try to get in touch with someone from that office, because it's such a large firm that the capabilities and the immediate requirements vary a lot globally. So it's always just easier to get in touch with someone from the office you're looking to join and starting off there.
Perfect, thank you. You've come in regarding the typical steps in the interview recruiting process. Perhaps if you could describe that, and also when you're planning to have a case-based interview, is that strictly case-based or is it also behavioral interviews?
So our typical recruiting process consists of 3 rounds. The third being just meeting the managing director. So if I begin with the first one, it's probably 2 interviews for a senior associate. So it's probably 2 interviews with senior associates or manager, and then 2 interviews with senior directors, and probably the final one would be meeting the managing director. That's what we usually do. There's always exceptions depending on the candidate's performance. How the interviews go, there is definitely a case element to the interview, but there's also a behavioral case, the behavioral part to the interview. So we try and cover both, and we try and weigh both equally, because to us, not only do we want someone who's intelligent and smart, at the end of the day, as teams, we're gonna be stuck with someone for several months, several weeks at a time. Is that a person you're happy staying with? Is that a person you want to spend that much time with? And that question, to me, comes before the case interview as well.
Excellent.
Few
Coming
questions
in
regarding
the
company structure.
How is the company structured? What are the
different
different
departments?
So globally, there's, I think, between 15 to 20 different practices in the company, which vary around things like M&A advisory. Some of them are function-based, like M&A, like strategy and restructuring. Some of them are industry-based, so consultants who have a strong specialization in healthcare, banking, etc. In the Middle East, where we work, we have 3 core practices. Mohammed and I both work for the strategy and performance improvement practice, which mainly focuses on large-scale transformations, strategy engagements, due diligences, post-merger integration, things like that. We also have a fairly large restructuring practice, which works with a lot of distressed and insolvent companies in the region. And we also have a forensic investigations practice, which does a lot of forensic accounting and fraud assessments. So those are the three core groups for the Middle East.
Excellent.
When we talk about a company, what is the company and team culture like?
What's the company and team culture? And we're not friends, so I don't like carnivore. I'm stuck with them. So what usually happens is, because we work in such small teams, and relatively small, 3 to 5 people, is we tend to be more friends than colleagues. And to be honest, you need that in consulting. And if you're working with people who you just want to do your work and leave, it's not going to work. You're not going to be able to last. And you need someone who's funny, someone who you can spend time with, and someone you can actually say, listen guys, I don't have work tomorrow, or let's say on a weekend, let's hang out. So there needs to be that culture, that friendliness, not just friendliness, and you also need people you can look up to, and you need to be someone where people can look up to. So it's more of a team culture and a friends culture more than a work and a colleagues.
Perfect.
Perfect.
And what
And
made
what
you
made
want
you
to
want
work
to
at
work
Alvarez
at Alvarez
Marsal?
Marsal?
What made me is this guy.
Both of you.
Both of you.
Go on, answer.
So I think when I was so I started out as an intern during my senior year of my undergraduate degree, and what I had heard about A&M is that they definitely have a very strong focus on strategy and transformation, but specifically there's a long focus on genuine company turnaround and client turnaround, which was probably what attracted me the most, because I had interned at another consulting firm before which did a lot of pure play strategy work. And what attracted me the most was actually seeing your ideas implemented and being a part of that process. I worked with a publicly traded real estate developer last year in the UAE, where we were essentially given control of the company and we were running it as interim management, which is something you really don't get to do in most consulting firms. And it's an entirely different experience, and the skill set you need is entirely different. So you get a chance to learn and grow, not just as a consultant and as an advisor, but actually as a practitioner as well. And we have a very unique consultant practitioner hybrid business model. We don't only source career consultants like we may be looking at for most of our MBA recruiting, but we also look to source veterans from various different industries. We've had managing directors who have previously been CEOs of banks or have led large companies in retail, FMCG, because they bring that industry experience and that level of detail that complements the consulting toolkit very well. So it's that hybrid business model probably that really drew me to A&M, because I've seen the impact that can create with clients.
That's for Khan. For me, it's completely different. And to me, and I wanted to move into consulting, but I didn't want the typical strategy, how things are run in other consulting firms. I had a friend who introduced me to someone that worked in A&M. I had a brief chat, and honestly speaking, it was just that person's enthusiasm. And I was having lunch, and that person was like, I have the best job in the world, and I'm like, I've never heard someone talk about their job this way. Then it's definitely something wrong. And it was a girl, and she's like, no, I promise I love my job, and I love my life. And then I thought to myself, hang on, if she's this happy, something must be going right there. And I joined, and that was the main reason I did.
Excellent. So perhaps to conclude this session, what advice do you have for MBAs trying to land the role with A&M?
So I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is, apply freely, regardless of your experience, regardless of your background. Definitely apply. We want to look at every single one of your profiles, and if all goes well and you pass the screening and you make the interviews, be yourself and don't be afraid to take a risk. The interviewer is not there to scare you. We're not there to put pressure on you. We want to see you succeed. So when you're coming in, whether it's a phone interview, whether we fly you out to Dubai for face-to-face, just really tell yourself that, I'm part of the same team and we're working towards something collectively. The interviews are just our way of making sure you'd be the right fit, but we want to see you succeed, because I've seen a lot of candidates, myself included early on in my career, who really get very nervous and very psyched out in the interview process because of this reputation that management consulting has with its demanding and grueling interviews. But it's really not like that. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give.
Mine would be exactly what Karan said: is be yourself, and don't try and do more, and just be yourself. Assume you're talking to a colleague of yours, you're brainstorming, and just take the interview that way. If it works, and it's a great opportunity, you'll learn a lot, you'll enjoy your time. If it doesn't, it's fine, you move on. Maybe we're not a good fit for you, maybe you're not a good fit for us. Same as Karan said early on in my career, I failed several interviews, and it happens. And it always ends up for the best. But I think I failed them because I tried too much. I overcomplicated. I overanalyzed. Just be yourself and enjoy it at the end of the day.
Excellent. Well, Khan and MJ, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us here today, sharing more about your experience about the company. So again, thank you very much. To the attendees, the recording of the session will be on the event website within a few hours, and just in a few minutes, we're also starting another session if you would like to join that one as well.
Thank you again.
Thank you again.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Can we join the other session?
Of course.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.